Now that we've had an in-depth look at each pillar of genius, let's talk about how your mind uses them and what influence they have on you. Remember that there are 8 pillars of genius in total? You probably recognized yourself in at least 1 or 2 of them, while other genius styles didn't resonate with you at all. Interestingly, 4 of the pillars we described have a major impact on you as an individual. How? To illustrate, think of your mind as a 4-passenger car occupied by 4 different people. In the front seat of your mind, you have a driver, and sitting next to the driver is a co-pilot who helps navigate. In the back seat directly behind the co-pilot sits a 10-year-old, and next to the 10-year-old, directly behind the driver, sits a 3-year-old. These 4 positions represent different parts of who you are and how you think. Each is a different mental process, or genius, that you access depending upon the situation and the circumstances in your life. The driver is the mental process you've been using your entire life. So naturally, it's the most developed process as you use it all the time. It is your strongest pillar of genius, as well as your flow state. What do we mean when we say flow state? This mental process gives you energy just by using it. It refuels you and juices your batteries. You can see why you would love it and love using it. It just feels really good. It also becomes clear why this process is in the driver's seat and is more developed than your other mental processes. Your driver is either an extroverted or an introverted process. If it's introverted, that means it helps you access your internal world, the places inside of yourself. If it's extroverted, that means it helps you interact with the world outside and get feedback from the environment. The driver also helps you either understand information or make decisions. So depending upon the style of genius your driver is, it is either extroverted or introverted, and at the same time, it either understands information or makes decisions. That can seem a little complicated, so to break it down, I'll use myself as an example. My driver, or my favorite pillar of genius, is extroverted, and it helps me understand information. That means I love interacting with my environment and learning how things work. That's when I'm in my flow state. However, I also need balance. I need an introverted part of me, or a way to access my internal world. And I need a decision-making process, or a way to prioritize and place value on the information I learn. But that can't be found in my driver. That's why I desperately need a co-pilot. Now here's how the co-pilot works. It rounds us out and handles the tasks that our driver process would otherwise miss. For me, because my driver is extroverted and merely understands information, my co-pilot is introverted and it helps me make decisions. That makes it the perfect complement for my driver process. It's important to note that the co-pilot process does not produce a flow state on its own, so it doesn't feel quite as good when you're using it. But you do have a natural talent for the co-pilot, and you enjoy how much it complements the driver. Together, they give you everything you need. That's why we can call the co-pilot your growth state. Just as we identified your driver as a flow state, we can safely call the co-pilot a growth state. While it doesn't feel as good as the driver to use, developing your co-pilot is the biggest bang for your buck you can get in personal and business development. These 2 parts of you have an interesting relationship. Much like in an actual car, the co-pilot is there to support the driver and help navigate. The co-pilot is in service of the driver, not the other way around. Think of the balance of responsibilities as a 60-40 split. It's by first developing and then combining both of these 2 mental processes together that you can access your genius state. That's a lot of information, and it can be overwhelming. So let's take a moment to recap. Your driver and your co-pilot work together to give you access to your inner world as well as the world outside of you. And they help you both understand information as well as make decisions based upon that information. The driver does most of the muscle work, which is just fine by you as it feels great to use and puts you in flow. And your co-pilot assists the driver by picking up on things the driver would miss, thereby making the development of your co-pilot a high-leverage tool in both your personal and business lives. Now, there is a trade to having a genius state. Putting the time and effort into developing your genius means you are specializing, which requires narrowing your focus. When you become exceptional in some areas, it's easy to understand why there would be blind spots in others. The key is not to dilute your genius abilities by trying to be good at everything, but rather to understand how these blind spots can manifest themselves and then brilliantly manage them. The driver and the co-pilot are the processes you specialize in, and they are your genius. But if you notice, they aren't alone in the car. There's a 10-year-old and a 3-year-old in the back seat, which represent your less developed processes. Let's talk about those for a few moments and what they mean to you. Just like the dichotomies we discovered previously, each mental process or genius style has a polar opposite. When you are developing or using one process, you are by definition shutting off its opposite. Think of it as not getting any airtime. Often that process or a genius pillar is simply off your radar. In the illustration we've been using of a 4-passenger car, the opposite process of the co-pilot is the 10-year-old, which is why the 10-year-old sits directly behind it. Remember, you don't favor or use your co-pilot as much as you use your driver. So the co-pilot's exact opposite process has a little more room to grow and to develop. Despite this, it most often caps out at a 10-year-old's level of sophistication. For me, my co-pilot is technically called introverted thinking. We've nicknamed this the accuracy genius, which you probably remember from the 8 Pillars of Genius video. Therefore, my 10-year-old is its exact opposite, or extroverted feeling. The nickname we've given extroverted feeling is harmony. So for me, the harmony genius is not my strength, and is in fact limited in its development. To state that more simply, at some point in my life, my natural talent for the accuracy genius became my focus, and so its opposite, the harmony genius, literally took a backseat. Let's zoom in a little more to look at these relationships further. Did you notice that my driver process and my 10-year-old process share the same extroverted nature? This pattern holds true for everyone. The 10-year-old function always reflects the same extroverted or introverted preference as your driver. What does that mean? Well, we all feel most comfortable when we're in our preferred state of either extroversion or introversion. This is most notable in times of stress. Therefore, in less than ideal circumstances, you will have the tendency to avoid your co-pilot, the process that balances you out because it's the opposite of your preferred state. Everyone does this unconsciously. So what happens when you do it? Once your unconscious mind makes the decision to ignore your co-pilot, the most tempting voice for it to consult is the 10-year-old. Remember, your 10-year-old favors the same extroverted or introverted state as your driver. And in less than ideal situations, that sounds pretty good to a stressed out, harried driver looking for support, even if that means being imbalanced. Obviously, this causes you problems, as 10-year-olds aren't exactly equipped to handle adult circumstances or decisions. While you can do this in any situation that stresses you out, you tend to do this most often when you're avoiding something uncomfortable you'd rather pretend isn't there. When reality smacks us with something we don't want to see, the behavior we most often exhibit is defensiveness. That's why we call the 10-year-old your defensive state. The 10-year-old shows up in a variety of defensive behaviors depending upon your individual type and genius style. The good news is that there's a really simple personality hack to prevent yourself from jumping to your defensive 10-year-old reaction, and we'll show you that in just a moment. But first, there's another passenger in this car that we haven't talked about yet, and that you might be totally blind to. Remember when we said there's a 3-year-old right behind the driver? It sits directly behind the driver because, that's right, it's its mirror opposite. This little guy is the least developed process you have. And since you naturally want to stay in the driver as much as possible, you very rarely check in with this process. The 3-year-old is almost always the least sophisticated process you have. It only understands information or makes decisions in a very rudimentary way. You can try and remember what it was like to figure out a very confusing world as a 3-year-old. But suffice to say that the 3-year-old misses a lot of important details. That's why we call this function your blind spot state. Most of the time, the 3-year-old isn't even on your radar. So how does this process affect you? You will be the most impacted by your 3-year-old in times of extraordinary stress. This is how it works. You experience most of your life through the lens of your driver. And remember, you use the driver genius as often as you can. It's your go-to tool in your toolbox. But sometimes your driver process isn't yet the right tool for the job. And considering you call upon it so often, sometimes it simply gets fatigued or overtaxed from constant driving. In these moments, the brain has an extraordinary mechanism it calls upon to give your driver a break. Your brain knows that when you need to shut down one mental process, the fastest, easiest way to do this is to go to the opposite mental process. In this case, when the driver is overtaxed, you efficiently activate your 3-year-old to give the driver a must-needed rest. It's impressive that your brain knows to do this. The problem is that, in these moments, you're already stressed, and now you're utilizing a process that hasn't aged beyond 3 years old. This is the equivalent to a 3-year-old grabbing the wheel of a car because the driver suddenly passed out. It can look pretty hairy sometimes, but we all do it. You can probably relate to this. These are the times when you behave so immaturely, you don't even recognize yourself. You may have even apologized to someone using the very words, "I'm sorry, I just wasn't myself." You don't recognize yourself because you don't identify strongly with your 3-year-old process, and instead identify much stronger with the driver process. Despite this, the place you go for refuge in times of extraordinary stress is your inner 3-year-old. While it may seem that this part of you is a bad part, nothing is further from the truth. Just like in a family, while the younger members may not be as sophisticated, they're just as valuable, and they serve an important purpose. When you understand how your own personality operates and become familiar with the mechanisms in your mind, you can easily work with them and control the situation, not be controlled by it. We call these types of mental shortcuts personality hacks. Tips to deal with your shadows in a way that empowers you, not haunts or hurts you. So knowing what we know now, here's how to best use these hacks working with your personality. It's important to remember that when the 10-year-old and the 3-year-old surface in a way that doesn't feel good, it's oftentimes from unintended neglect. It's good to recognize that they are parts of you that have your best interest at heart. They just don't always have the discretion to know how to help. But there are ways you can learn to treat them well and that work to your advantage. Personality hack number 1, your 10-year-old. As we mentioned before, most people unconsciously retreat to their 10-year-old as a defense strategy. However, you can relate to your 10-year-old in a way that prevents it from feeling attacked or having a hair trigger of defense. Here's how. You can call upon your 10-year-old in times of play instead of in times of defense. This makes sense. 10-year-olds are great at playing, and play is their natural state. In fact, when you use this process in times of play, you'll discover how much higher quality your rest and relaxation becomes, and your desire to become defensive melts away. So you don't want to discourage this part of you, you want to encourage it in the right context. Once you learn what your 10-year-old process is, you will also be given tools which help prevent you from doing things like lashing out, retreating when things get tough, or even turning yourself into a weapon. Personality hack number 2, your 3-year-old. You don't have to keep the 3-year-old a blind spot that trips you up. Instead, you can utilize this process when you're decompressing. Remember, the 3-year-old allows you to give your driver a break. But instead of letting it grab the wheel of the car, which is catastrophic, you can instead pull the car over to the side of the road, give the driver a rest, and let the 3-year-old run around for a while. Essentially, you're giving space for the 3-year-old, who is often neglected and ignored, to do its thing. While you usually avoid this process, it can be extremely pleasurable, again, in the right context. Specifically as a sort of reboot in times of great stress. For example, in my case, my 3-year-old is called introverted sensing, or memory. You may remember the memory genius. It excels at accessing the past and creating a safe environment. This process is naturally a blind spot for me, and so usually I don't think in these terms. In order to exercise my 3-year-old, I've discovered that when my driver needs a break, the easiest way for me to de-stress is to watch a movie I've seen many times. If I don't have time for a movie, I can just listen to my favorite songs from when I was in high school. Now that's my reboot. Yours will most likely be different. Everyone has a unique decompression state based on their genius type. And this is part of what you'll learn when you receive a full profile. But now, let's wrap this up. The car diagram is an illustration for seeing and understanding how your mental processes work. You have a driver, which is your flow state. It's how you recharge your batteries and feel like you're at your best. In order to be a complete person, you also have a co-pilot. Exercising the co-pilot process is your greatest leverage point in personal growth. It's the combination of both your driver and your co-pilot that enables you to access your genius. In the back of the car, you have a process that is roughly the age of a 10-year-old. And this is where you tend to go in times of defensiveness. But you can understand and control this mental mechanism by using your 10-year-old process in times of play, a much happier and healthier state than defense. And last but not least, you have a process that is approximately 3 years old and can serve as a blind spot. We recommend, instead of being controlled by this process in times of great stress, that you instead control the process and use this extraordinary mechanism of the mind to decompress, reboot, and return to reality refreshed. The car diagram is an incredible tool for understanding your personality on a deep cognitive level, to equip you with tools of self-control unlike any other, and to both empower and naturally accelerate your genius. And while this can seem complicated, don't worry. We've done all the work for you, breaking down how your mind uses your unique set of mental processes. Once you discover what pillars of genius are sitting in your 4 seats, everything suddenly clicks, and things begin to make much more sense.